Hello and welcome to Even the Trunchbull, our show about children's books and why we still love them as adults.
She's Nina.
They're Matt.
And we think that children's books are for everyone because we've all been kids. Even the Trunchbull.
They're all mistakes, children. Filthy, nasty things. Glad I never was one.
From Roald Dahl's beloved Matilda, despite her protestations. Each episode, we'll be reviewing one picture book and one chapter book. We're starting off with the books that we read as kids, but if you've got a book that you'd like us to review, especially if you are currently a kid, then please get in touch. You can email us on eventhethrunchbull@gmail.com or catch us on Twitter at TrunchbullPod.
This week we're reading books linked by the theme of loneliness. Beegu by Alexis Deakin and The Boy Who Climbed into the Moon by David Almond. And shall we start with The Boy Who Climbed into the Moon, as it's so special to you, Matt?
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely adore this book. We tried recording this as a pilot, didn't we? And it didn't quite take, so we're redoing it. So we've already talked about this book a lot. This is one that I discovered for the podcast, so it's slightly special to me in that sense because a lot of the books have been brought by you, so it's nice to contribute one. And yeah, so having read it for the first time like a couple of months ago, it is possibly my favourite book. So I'm entirely biased and entirely willing to declare that bias.
Good.
We should credit as well also illustrations are by Polly Dunbar and are gorgeous.
They're lovely, aren't they?
Would you like to give us a synopsis rundown of the book, Nina?
Okay, yeah. So this is a book about a boy called Paul who lives in the basement of a tower block with his mum and dad, and he's having a sick day, even though he's not really sick. Because he's really not feeling school right now. People make him feel like he's stupid and he's got no good ideas. And he decides that he would like to touch the sky. So he gets the lift all the way up to the top of the building, and he meets a mysterious woman called Molly, or Mabel, we don't know. And she invites him to touch the sky through her skylight. And he does a little bit. It doesn't open very far, but he sticks his hands out. And then his parents arrive, and they're really flustered because they didn't know where he was. They sit down for some tea with Mabel or Molly, and adventures ensue. They visit Molly's brother, whose name is Benjamin, and then with Benjamin, they decide to try to find out whether the moon is actually a hole in the sky, which is Paul's personal theory. And so they get up there. Paul goes in, meets a girl called Fortuna, who seems to have been there for a long time. And then they come back out again, and everybody's reunited. The end.
Great.
Is that all right?
Yeah. So that was a completely accurate rundown of what happens, but I feel like the real essence of this book isn't captured by a synopsis. Essentially, you know, it's a book about ideas, like it's a kid's book,
Yeah.
but it's a book about ideas, and it's a book about imagination, and that's kind of why it works as a kid's book. Like the whole theme throughout the book is you say something and then it happens. You think something and then it happens, you know.
Yeah.
Paul is this isolated, lonely boy who goes on this journey of self-discovery. On the way up to the top of the building, he's meeting people who are saying, "Oh, you must be Mabel's nephew." So then when he gets up to the top and he meets this woman, he knows that she's Mabel. And she says, "Yes, hello,
Yeah.
but actually I'm sick of being Mabel, so I'm going to be Molly. We're going to pretend that I'm Mabel's twin sister. Mabel's off round the world travelling and I'm sitting the flat for her. So I'm Molly." And then it becomes completely accepted that she is Molly.
Yeah.
And then so while they're in the flat, Molly's pressing Paul for a good idea.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really have one. And she says, "Come on, you must have one. Just think, say something." And he says, "The moon is not the moon is a hole in the sky." And Molly's saying, "That's amazing, that's brilliant." And his mum says to him afterwards, "I didn't know you thought that." And he says, "Yeah, neither did I." until I said it. But then that becomes true. And there are loads of other things in the book that are said and then become true, and are true because they were said or were true anyway. So it becomes kind of a little bit about space and time. There's this lovely bit when they're on the way to Molly's brother's after they've been up in her flat, puts a telescope to the window and says, "Can you see my brother?" And Paul says, "No." And she says, "Well, have you imagined him yet?" And he says, "No." So, well, how could you possibly hope to see him?
Yeah, that's a great line, isn't it?
Yeah. And then he sees him. He looks again, he sees him. And when they're on the way to her brother's in Paul's dad's taxi, which he has because Molly has asked him, "What do you do?" And he says, "I'm a taxi driver." And she says, "I thought that's how we're going to get there." And now, is Paul's dad actually a taxi driver? Was he ever a taxi driver?
Debatable.
I think absolutely yes, but also entirely not until that was said, which doesn't mean it's not true. But they're driving there in the taxi, and Molly's going, "Right, you want to turn left here, and then left, and then when you see a cat, turn left. There's the cat, turn left, and now turn left again." And Paul's dad's going, "Well, we're back in the same street." She goes, "Are we? Was there a person in a green coat last time we were here?" "No." "Well, then it's not the same place, is it? Now turn right, now turn right, turn right, turn right again." And they go on like this for a while. And that passage, I think, is where I fell in love with this book. I was like, this is about the space-time continuum in a kid's book.
It's about you can't cross the same river twice, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose there's an element of the beat poets in this. That idea of you think a thing and then it is. That first thought, best thought. And I remembered a Paris Review interview I'd read with William Burroughs, where he's talking about there being no such thing as coincidence, which is this idea that Burroughs believes in firmly, that coincidence doesn't exist. That feeling of you thinking something and then it happening and that seeming strange isn't strange. You have made that thing happen by thinking it.
The ladder bit. That's my favourite bit. Once Paul has explained his idea about the moon being a hole in the sky to Molly and then also to her brother Benjamin, they decide to test the hypothesis, and they decide that they're going to need to get up on the roof so that Paul can go and see if the moon is a hole in the sky, and they're going to need a ladder up there. And so Molly goes, "Aren't you also a window cleaner?" or something, like Paul's dad, and he's like, "Oh yes, of course, I just have this massive ladder."
No, she says, "What else do you do?
Oh, yeah,
when you're not a taxi driver, what else do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm a window cleaner." She goes, "Yeah, I thought you would be.
Yeah.
You'll have ladders in the course of your work then, won't you?" And he says, "Yeah, I do. They're in a lockup right behind that building that was stood next to."
It's so convenient. It just happens to be because they need it to be.
I read this one with my partner, and her idea was that Molly is very much a Doctor Who character.
Oh, yes.
Which I thought was a really, really good parallel. You know, like
specifically the Matt Smith one.
Yeah, but that thing of like, there is a complete logic to everything she does and says, but the logic is kind of shifted slightly to the left. So you're not immediately aware of what that logic is, and it seems crackers.
Yeah.
But is completely following its own set of rules. Yes,
and you'll understand it later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that is a good thought, partner of Matt's. So they need a way to get the ladder to the top of the building so that Paul can climb into the moon. And they can't work out how to do it. And then they go, "Well, we've got neighbours and friends. They're going to help us." And so they all call out, neighbours and friends, we need your help. Paul has a wonderful idea. We need to get this ladder. Like, stick your hands out of the windows and we'll pass you the ladder, and you can pass the ladder up the building all the way to the roof. And they all do it. And it's as if the hands are climbing the ladder, but the ladder's climbing the hands up the side of the building and onto the roof. And like, to me, that was like the most visually striking moment. That was so beautiful. And
it's
like
gorgeous,
a painting.
isn't it?
Yeah.
We could find... Let's see if we can find that section. Here it is. But what can we do? Came a voice tumbling down from the heights. Stick your hands out of the window, yelled Molly. Lift the ladder. Hundreds of pale hands appeared, shining in the moonlight, sticking out into the night sky. Now give them the ladder, said Molly. Alfred extended the ladder. He carried it towards the apartment block. The hands took hold of the rungs. Take it up, called Molly. And the hands began moving from rung to rung, just like they were climbing, but it was the ladder that climbed, foot by foot, window by window, floor by floor, towards the sky.
Isn't it lovely?
It's great. It's just such a, like, this is what David Almond does so well. It's simple images, well tooled.
Yeah.
Just well tooled, simple images. And this kind of, yeah, I mean, this is sort of, this book's kind of structured a little bit like a poem for me. It's kind of very simple in terms of actual events, you know.
Yeah, when you do the synopsis, it doesn't sound good.
Paul goes from the basement to the top floor because he wants to touch the sky. He meets a woman who has a sort of shifting personality, who presses him for a theory, which is that the moon's a hole in the sky. Takes him to meet her brother, who is kind of like a war vet with some very interesting ideas on the world.
Yes, we need to talk about Benjamin.
We need to talk about Benjamin, yeah. And then they go back to the apartment block, run up a ladder, stick the ladder against the moon, climb in, meet the people who've flown into the moon in the past, climb back out, and bring one of those people back with them. And that's kind of it, but it's so carefully written. Like, there are bits in terms of that determinism, like there are bits where, for instance, it'll be written like they press the button for floor 9 and the lift went to floor 9. And spelling it out like that doesn't seem necessary, but again, it's all kind of tied back into the same theme right from the beginning of you can make a thing happen by saying it.
Yeah.
And ideas are important.
Yes. It is a book about ideas, isn't it?
Yeah.
And about Paul's ideas being important. And at the beginning, Paul specifically says, oh, at school they don't think he has good ideas. And that's why he doesn't want to go to school. And then he's sort of a little bit pressured by Molly and Benjamin, isn't it? Especially Benjamin, because Benjamin threatens to put his head back in the paper bag every time Paul hesitates too long.
Tell us about Benjamin. Tell us about Benjamin.
So Benjamin, seen through the telescope, is small with curly hair, and he's doing his garden. And then when they get there after their journey in the taxi, he looks like Jesus. As in, like, white Jesus, who you see in like all the Renaissance paintings. He's tall and thin, with a long beard and long straight hair, blonde, I think. And he is having a bad day. Molly explains that when he was growing up, he was so shy that he had to have a paper bag over his head all the time, which, you know, relate. I didn't have a paper bag, but I was so shy I couldn't say my own name. It was too embarrassing for me to acknowledge my existence by saying my own name. It was really hard for me to be introduced to people for that reason. And sometimes he has relapses where he needs to go back into the bag, and they arrive and he's in the bag. And she's like, oh no. And Paul's like, should we leave him? And she's like, nope, come on. How's your day been from 1 to 10? 1 being really rubbish and 10 being really great. And he goes, 1. She's like, aha, the scale is actually the other way around. 1 is really great. And he is convinced. He's like, oh, I do feel really great.
He's transformed.
So he's transformed. And he's happy and he wants chatty. And he tells Paul and his parents some stories about the war that he was in. And that he kept dying in the war, and that was the only way to bring the war to an end, was just to lie down in the ditch and die. Yeah. And so he just kept doing that over and over again, and everybody else did it. And in the end, the war stopped because, like, there was nobody left standing.
He has support for Paul's theory. Which
he forgets to add the first time he tells the story.
Yeah. So he's about to go in again. Paul's saying, He goes, oh, why was I telling that story? Paul says, you were going to back up my theory that the moon is a hole in the sky. He says, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I saw, when I was lying dead in the ditch this one time, I saw a bomber coming over and everyone around me was scattering and panicking because this bomber was heading straight for us. And then it disappeared and it flew into the moon. And I thought, the moon is not a moon, it's a hole in the sky. So there you go, that supports your theory. So I totally didn't pick up on the Benjamin as Jesus thing.
Okay.
And I know last time we were chatting about this, you mentioned that. And I was like, yeah. And then we started to chat about that a bit. And like, maybe the moon is heaven. And it's this place where like, it feels like this limbo space. Because once they get into the moon, Paul meets Fortuna, who got blasted out of a cannon by her uncle, who put a bit more gunpowder in than usual. And she went straight into the moon. Rather than into a net on the other side of the pyramids. And she was really shocked that Paul didn't remember her and was really keen that people remembered her. And everyone in the moon had this thing about being remembered. But everyone in the moon was nice to each other. And there were all of the bombers and missiles and bomber planes all stacked up in there. But there were also pterodactyls. And trapeze artists and hang gliders and like biplanes from like the first experiments of human flight. But everyone in there is kind of trapped in this like childlike limbo zone.
And they're so nice that Paul actually suggests that everybody take a year or two in the moon to become nice.
I think Fortuna suggests it. Yeah, it says, Fortuna? everyone should spend a year up here. That'd sort everything out down there.
Yeah, it is quite heaven-like in that way as well, isn't it? And the wanting to be remembered, that's a very, like, dead person thing.
Yeah.
And Paul doesn't remember Fortuna because she was shot into the moon.
In the 20s,
maybe a century ago? Yeah, a century ago for now, yeah. So that's why he doesn't remember her.
But Molly does.
We need to talk about... Molly does. Because Molly is Doctor Who. Whose brother is Jesus.
But yeah, so the Jesus thing. So, okay, do we go into this one? Because I've already done a lot of academic research.
Yes, I want to talk about Jesus.
You want to talk about Jesus? Cool.
Benjamin.
Start us off on Jesus.
His story about war is a story about self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
And falling down and rising again. You know, that like the only way to bring the war to an end was for him to die. And so he did. And that's, you know, Christianity, isn't it? Is Jesus dies for us all. And he does it over and over again. But also, so when he first tells Paul this, Paul's like, but you're alive. He says, I was dead, not I am dead.
Yeah.
You know, so he's able to come back from the dead. And he guides Paul to this heavenly place. And the thing that really made me think that he's Jesus is the very last illustration, which is basically the Last Supper. They're laid out exactly the same around the table, and there's Benjamin / Jesus in the middle. Is he offering someone a sausage sandwich? I think he is.
Because sausage sandwiches are better than war.
Because that's
theory.
Another one of Paul's great thoughts. And
for the sake of vegetarians and religious beliefs, we're going to assume that this sausage sandwich doesn't necessarily need to be pork or any kind of meat. But that in mind, we can all agree that sausage sandwiches are better than more.
Yes. And what we'd said about him is, so he's got these like parallels with Jesus. He's also quite clearly a mentally ill man who just wants everyone to get on and be nice.
There's definitely PTSD going on, isn't there? It's quite...
Yes, definitely
it's not
from the
subtle.
war. That's quite
and again, not something that kids would pick up on, but totally like a really easy avenue into talking about that with kids if you wanted to. Like, it sets that up in a really accessible way.
But maybe that's just what Jesus was. Maybe Jesus was just a bloke who asked a lot of questions and who led people in the right direction and wanted people to stop dying and for war to end and for everyone to be okay. And then everybody, was like, oh, son of God, you're the most important person ever. And maybe he was, and also he was just this, like, slightly crackers person who went around asking too many questions. I also want to talk about Fortuna, because in the course of my research for this book, I went and had a look on Goodreads, and opinion is very divided on this book. A lot of people don't like it, and the people who don't like it think Fortuna is a brat.
I mean, she is a little bit. But okay, so again, let's look at Fortuna's situation. She's in heaven limbo land. And clearly in life, like, her whole crack was being fired out of a cannon over stuff by her uncle. And Paul says, like, oh, that's a shame, your uncle must miss you. And she goes, must he? I had a cousin called Florella. He'll have just trained her up. So, like, there's a lot of kind of childhood neglect going on there, right? Yeah. So I think the fact that because she's really put out, like, someone else her age drops through a hole in the moon. That must be amazing for her. Like, she's seen another person from the world below. And she's not remembered. And she's really upset about it. So what do you mean you don't remember me? And she's really put out.
She is upset about that. And she's really jealous that he has really nice parents who are worried that he'll get stuck in the moon and not come back. And so she keeps trying to tempt him to stay.
But then they let him go. Of course. That tension build at the end is amazing and so well written. And, like, certainly the first time I read it, I was like, I could feel his mum's panic. Like, I genuinely didn't know whether he was going to get stuck in the moon forever. But I don't think Fortuna's a brat. I think she invites herself back into the world with him. But I think that's kind of lovely. Like, she's being as brave as she's suggesting he should be in the same way. Yes. And she doesn't ask, but it's entirely clear that there's space for Paul to say no. She just says, take me with you. But again, it's that determinism thing. It's, I'm going to say this and then it will happen. But that doesn't strike me as bratish. It just, the way that that's written just strikes me as, again, folding back into the themes that you set up. All in a kid's book, which is amazing. Like, read this book. Do you know what I think as well? Because I've read this twice now, and the second time I read it like to and with my partner, and we sort of read it chapter by chapter, which, having already read it, was lovely. But when I first read it, I read the whole thing in an hour. Yeah. And I really think that is the way to conceive and experience this book. Like, I couldn't put it down. Like, I think it's... Because it's kind of like watching a film. Like, if you've got the time, and it should just take an hour and a half. It's about, what? How many pages is it?
It's about 100.
About 100 maybe. Pages or something, but quite big type.
Yeah.
About 150. Quite big type.
Lots of pictures.
But it's, read it in one go if you can.
So you think it's a one gulp book?
I reckon, yeah.
Okay. I think it's possibly a good read aloud, though. Like, I think maybe a child might not have the patience to keep with it, but might enjoy having it read to them as sort of a soothing, not much
both,
happening.
Or either, depending on your circumstance. If you're an adult who wants to read this, and I'd absolutely recommend it, put an hour aside and blitz through it, and then read it again, and then again. Or if you're reading it to kids, then 2 chapters in a go. They're short chapters. Give them 2. Be nice. Treat your kids. Adorable.
We're recommending it to everyone.
Yeah, everyone. Yeah. Enjoyable kids' book that is a simple story about imagination, and if you want it to be, is also about philosophical debates over free will and the space-time continuum. So that's The Boy Who Climbed Into the Moon.
Beegu by Alexis Deakin. I found in the library. I don't have a long history with it, but I really like it, and I think it pairs really nicely with The Boy Who Climbed Into the Moon. Do you want to summarise it, Matt?
Yes, I'll give it a go. The So there's a little alien rabbit called Beegu who wakes up and is alone and doesn't know where their mum is. Thinks they can hear their mum calling, but it's not, it's just a telephone box ringing. And then tries to find some friends or some people that can love them, and thinks they've found some in a stray dog's home. Curls up in a box with some little puppies, but then gets promptly thrown out in the morning by the owner of the home, and then wanders around a bit more, thinks they can hear their mum, can't again, and then comes to a school or a creche, and kind of does make really good friends with some kids, which is going really well until the sort of teacher comes over and throws Beegu out by their ear. And so then Beegu's alone again.
But now she has a hoop from the children.
Has a hoop from the children,
Yeah.
Classic sort of Beamish style Victorian
Hula
hoop
hoop.
and stick. Or a hula hoop, yeah.
Well, she uses her
read it
ears as a
that.
stick.
Yeah. And then does hear her mum, and they come down in a spaceship and beam her up, and she tells her parents all about how most of the people here are pretty unfriendly, but some of the littler ones are nice, and she hopes that the little ones will remember her.
Yeah.
I'm saying her now, I was going with them. I think
It's she in the book.
it's she in the book, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I couldn't remember, and I thought, yeah, Beegu's pretty gender neutral, but it's gone with she. Cool.
So, this book to me is shockingly sad. There are so many beautiful illustrations of Beegu, this little rabbit-looking alien with 3 eyes. Just
Bright yellow rabbit, basically.
Yeah.
Bright yellow 3-eyed rabbit.
and the antenna / ears are so expressive, aren't they? They show all of her feelings. And she's often just looking out over the city or looking out over the planet, and she's all alone, and you really feel that. You really feel it with her. And the point after she's been thrown out of the school and she's back to being all alone now with Hoop. You said when we first read this that felt like the real end of the story. The real last page where it's just another 2-page spread of her lying on her side all alone.
And she says, and it repeats, she thinks she can hear her mum calling,
Yeah.
but she can't. Or can she?
Yes.
And that felt like, yeah, structurally that feels like the end,
Yeah.
but it isn't quite.
So everything good in this book is yellow.
Yeah.
Beegu is yellow. Beegu is very yellow. And the puppies are yellow.
Yes.
And the children are dressed in yellow at school. And then the tractor beam that beams her back up to her home is yellow. And the moon is yellow. And her parents are yellow. And I love the use of colour in this book. It's so, like, often the backgrounds are sort of almost drab looking in comparison to Beegu. Beegu is this bright flash, and she's so full of hope and love, isn't she? And I love her little, they're almost like hieroglyphics that she talks in.
Yeah.
I love the last page where basically the whole book is summarised in a little speech bubble from Beegu. She's like, oh, those are puppies. And, you can't recognise every hieroglyphic, but she's like, oh, that's puppies, that's hoop, that's school, that's telephone box, that's moon.
I feel like I know what Beegu would sound like, even though you get no actual indication of that.
Oh, go on, what does Beegu sound like?
I feel like it's this sort of like bloopy, excited blabble. Very quick and very...
Yes, I agree. I think that's what she sounds like too.
She's a sponge for information in the way that little kids are, I think. And too naive to kind of consider the idea that anyone would be unfriendly. She's just like, oh, I'm alone. I would like to not be. Let's go and find some people or things or whatever there is.
And first she speaks to some rabbits, because they've got ears like her.
Yes.
But they don't listen.
No.
And then she tries to speak to some leaves, but they don't even stick around to hear her.
Yeah.
They just blow away. She's, because she's new on this planet, she's no idea what's sentient and what's not.
But she's new to any planet, right?
Yeah.
Like, I get the impression she's dead little.
Yeah, me too. And she's just, with every new encounter, even though she's rejected at every turn, she's full of hope. Maybe you will be my friend. Maybe you will play with me. And she always really tries. And then the adults who throw her out of the various situations where she finds friends have this look, don't they? They have this build and this colour profile and this looking down the nose.
Yeah, the head teacher in the playground is drawn so well. I remember when we first read this together, like, even before you turn the page and she's throwing Beegu out, like, as soon as she appears in the picture, I was like, oh, she's bad news. She's trouble. We've got these, like, horn-rimmed glasses pointing up at the end. A bit Miss Trunchbull, actually, but a bit more librarian version.
Yeah.
But that similar sort of absolute no nonsense, like, let's hammer throw this over the fence where it belongs.
Yeah, and she holds Beegu at arm's length, like the owner of the dog shelter. They both hold her at arm's length, as if she's dirty.
And they're both people whose job is to care for people or
young,
animals.
Small things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they should care. Or maybe they can't tell that she's young and small because she's so alien.
Or it doesn't matter that she's young and small. She's different. She's separate from what they are specifically chartered with looking after.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Oh, do you know what Beegu sounds like? Beegu sounds like a telephone box. Of course.
Yeah, because that's
her mother's voice. That's what she thinks is her mother's voice. They sound like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm right, but I didn't invent that thought. We're back to determinism, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, when I first read this, I thought, this is almost too sad for a child.
It needs that ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You couldn't actually just leave her on the hillside with a hoop.
That is, I don't know, I don't totally know why, but, like, structurally that is where it should end.
Yeah.
She's back where she started on the hill, and there's this vague glimmer of something else is going to change.
Yeah.
I think reading it as an adult, you know that the next step is, her parents are going to come back.
Yeah. They really need to come back.
Yeah. It is so bleak
sad.
Otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, the whole story is just lowly things stays lonely. People are rubbish.
But it stays with people are rubbish.
It does.
And I think that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
For a children's book.
Well, it stays with... I mean, I think the way it phrases it is quite nice, actually. It's a planet full of people, and the big ones are quite unfriendly, but some of the smaller ones were really playful.
Yeah. And they gave her this hoop, and she's showing the hoop to her parents.
Yeah.
I think it's quite lovely. I really liked the way the sky was painted as well. In all of them, and the way the spaceship sort of comes out of the moon.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the same moon from letting things in and out.
It's that kind of Lowry wash, isn't it? It's got that kind of, quite a nostalgic
feel. Which allows
feel.
Beegu to like really stand out with her fluorescent yellow ears.
Yeah.
This is really beautiful. And I think people should read it, should get it out of the library.
It's a little emotional kind of gut punch.
It is.
But softened at the end. So yeah, I think a lovely one for little kids. I think in terms of age, like what we're talking sort of up to about 5 or 6.
Yeah. But I would start at 2.
Yeah.
Go to 6.
Yeah.
Let them stay in the room when they're 9.
Yeah.
If you've got a 4-year-old sibling to be read to.
Yeah. But if you're in the library and they have it, have a read anyway.
Definitely read it to yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Have a little like heart-clenching moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was episode 4 of Even the Trunchbull.
Thanks for listening.
Once again, if you've any thoughts on books you loved as a kid,
All of now as a kid.
let us know, or ask a grown-up to let us know. We're at eventhetrunchbull@gmail.com, or you can catch us on Twitter at Trunchbull Pod.
Intro music for this episode and every episode is What a Wonderful Day by Shane Ivers.
And remember, kids' books can be for everyone, because we've all been kids.
Even the Trunchbull.